The morning I was fired, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't say a single word. I just picked up a cardboard box with 31 years of my life inside it, and I walked out past men I had hired, men whose children's names I still remembered, and not one of them could look me in the eye. I was 58 years old. I had 3 years left until retirement. My wife and I had a paid-off house, a daughter who taught 3rd grade in Columbus, and a small maple tree in the front yard that my father planted the spring before he died. I had a brown leather belt around my waist that he gave me on my wedding day, and a small spiral notebook in my shirt pocket that had the name of every person on that warehouse floor written inside it, along with the names of their wives, their husbands, their kids, and in a few cases, the dogs they brought home from the shelter. And the man who fired me, a boy half my age in a suit that cost more than my first car, stood at the front of that conference room and told the whole company that the era of $1,000 thinkers had begun. He said my time was over. He said it with a smile, the kind of smile a man gives when he believes he's the smartest person in the room and wants everyone to know it. He was wrong about that, but it would be 2 more weeks before any of us knew it, and it would all start with a phone call I never expected to receive. I want to tell you that story, the whole story, not just the firing and not just what came after, but the part most people never get to see, the quiet decades a man spends building something that nobody can measure until one day, when he needs it most, that something turns around and saves his life. But to tell it right, I have to take you back 4 weeks, back before the box, before the boardroom, before the boy in the expensive suit, back to a Tuesday morning in October when I still thought I knew exactly how the rest of my life was going to look. My name is James Whitaker. I live in a town outside Toledo, Ohio, the kind of town where everyone knows what kind of truck you drive and which church parking lot you don't pull into. I've worked in logistics since I was 27 years old. Started on the loading dock at a place called Whitman Harrison Freight, hauling pallets in the dead of winter for $8.40 an hour. I worked my way up the slow way, the only way I ever knew. By the time Whitman Harrison got bought out and folded into a regional company called Halberd Freight and Logistics in 1997, I was already running the night shift. By 2005, I had the title of Senior Operations Manager. By 2025, I had 3 decades of handshakes, 10,000 miles of trucking corridor memorized in my head, and a Rolodex of friends in every port and every freight yard between Buffalo and St. Louis. I don't say any of that to brag. I say it because I want you to understand what was in that cardboard box when I carried it out the door. It wasn't a coffee mug and a framed photo. It was a life. The truth is, I never thought of myself as a successful man. Not the way television tells you to think about success. I never made 6 figures. I never owned a boat. I never took my wife to Europe, though Lord knows she deserved it. What I had was a marriage of 32 years to a woman named Marlene, a daughter named Hannah who still called me on Sunday nights, a paid-off brick ranch with a covered porch, and the kind of reputation in my industry that meant when I said something, men believed me. And that, as it turned out, was worth more than I ever imagined. But I didn't know that on the morning of the firing. On that morning, all I knew was that the box in my hands felt heavier than it had any right to feel. I knew that the security guard at the front door, a man named Tony, whose youngest boy I had once written a recommendation letter for, was crying quietly behind his desk as I walked past. I knew that the parking lot looked grayer than it ever had before, the kind of gray that only the first week of November in northern Ohio can produce, and that the wind off Lake Erie cut straight through my coat as I walked to my truck. I sat in the cab of that truck for a long time before I turned the key. I set the box on the passenger seat. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out the little notebook. I held it in my lap, and I just looked at it. For 31 years, that notebook had felt like the most important thing I owned. And on that morning, sitting in that cold parking lot, I honestly didn't know if it still belonged to me. So let me take you back. Let me show you what kind of life leads a man to a moment like that. And let me show you what kind of life makes a phone call, 2 weeks later, change everything. It starts on a Tuesday morning in October, at a diner called Ruthie's, where I had eaten breakfast every Saturday for 26 years. But on that particular Tuesday, for reasons I couldn't explain, even now, I decided to stop in on my way to work. Ruthie's sits on the corner of LaGrange Street and a county road that doesn't have an official name anymore. Just a number. The building used to be a gas station back in the 1950s, and you can still see the old concrete island in the parking lot where the pumps used to be. Ruthie herself passed away in 1991, but her daughter kept the place going, and then her granddaughter. And now a woman named Dolores runs the front counter. Dolores is 64 years old, has been a widow for 11 of them, and she remembers every regular's order without writing it down. I walked in that Tuesday morning a little before 6. The bell on the door gave its familiar, tired jingle. The smell hit me first: bacon, strong coffee, and that particular kind of butter they used on the grill that I've never been able to find anywhere else. Dolores looked up from the register and tipped her chin at me. 2 eggs, wheat toast, no jelly. She said. It wasn't a question. Make it 3 eggs today. Dolores, I don't know why, but I'm hungry. She raised an eyebrow at me. James Whitaker, you have not changed your order in 11 years. Something on your mind. I shrugged and slid into the corner booth by the window. Just one of those mornings, I guess. She brought my coffee over without my asking. Black. No sugar. She set it down and lingered a second longer than usual, the way she does when she can tell something is off but isn't going to pry. That's the thing about Dolores. She knows when to ask and when to leave a man alone with his own thinking. The truth was, I'd had a feeling for about a week. Nothing I could put my finger on. Just a kind of low hum in the back of my mind. The way you can tell a storm is coming before there's a single cloud in the sky. My company had been sold 3 months earlier to a venture capital outfit called Viridian Capital Partners, based out of New York. They had bought up 4 regional freight companies in 18 months. Halberd was the largest. The official announcement had said all the right things: strategic growth, operational excellence, our valued team members. The kind of words that mean nothing because they could mean anything. But in the 3 months since the sale, I had noticed a few things. Bill Hendricks, our director of compliance, had been let go in August. 26 years with the company. They gave him a nice plaque and a Friday afternoon send-off and replaced him with a 29-year-old from Boston who had never set foot on a loading dock. Patty Vasquez, who had run our accounts receivable for 19 years, was told her position was being restructured. She was offered a lateral move to a part-time role with no benefits. She turned it down and retired 3 years earlier than she had planned. And then there was the new regional manager, Brandon Cole, 31 years old, MBA from somewhere in Pennsylvania, nephew, by the way, of a man named Curtis Cole, who happened to sit on the Viridian board. Nobody said that part out loud, but nobody had to. Brandon had been at Halberd for 6 weeks by that Tuesday morning. I had been in 3 meetings with him. I had watched him pace the front of the conference room in shoes that probably cost more than my first mortgage payment. And I had listened to him use words like synergy and AI-driven optimization and legacy talent restructuring. That last phrase he liked especially. He used it twice in one meeting, both times while looking in my general direction. I sipped my coffee at Ruthie's and watched the headlights pass on Lagrange Street and thought about all of this without really thinking about it. The way an old farmer can feel the barometric pressure in his bad knee. Dolores brought my eggs. I ate slowly. I tipped a little more than usual. I don't know why. By 6:45, I was pulling into the parking lot at Halberd Freight. The building sat in a gray industrial park off the interstate, low and long, with a logistics yard behind it the size of 3 football fields. There were trucks idling along the loading bays, exhaust steaming up into the cold air. I knew every one of those trucks by their numbers. I knew most of the drivers by name. I walked in through the side door and made my rounds the way I always did. Earl Coleman was in the dispatch office. Earl was 63 years old, a big man with hands like catcher's mitts and a deep voice that made every word sound like it mattered. He'd worked with me for 22 years. "James," he said, lifting his coffee cup. "How's Marlene?" "Still puts up with me." "How's Edith?" "Still puts up with me, somehow." I asked about his grandson, who had just started middle school. I asked because I remembered the boy's name was Marcus, and that he had been nervous about the bus route. Earl told me Marcus was doing fine, had even made a friend on the first day. Earl's eyes were warm when he said it. I walked through dispatch and into the warehouse floor. I waved to Rosa Delgado, who had run inventory for 15 years. I asked Mike Stoll about his wife's surgery. She'd had a hip replaced in September. I stopped by the driver's lounge and refilled the coffee pot myself, because the last person to make a pot had left it half empty. And that was the kind of thing that bothered me more than it should. And in my shirt pocket, against my chest, sat that little spiral notebook. It wasn't a brag book. It wasn't a productivity tool. It was a list of names, and beside each name, in my own bad handwriting, a few words. Earl Coleman, wife Edith, grandson Marcus, Rosa Delgado, daughter Sophia, son-in-law Hector, Mike Stoll, wife's name Brenda, son in the Marines. Dolores at Ruthie's late husband was named Ray. Anniversary was in April. Some of the entries went back almost 3 decades. Some of the people were no longer alive. I never crossed any of them out. That was my morning. That was my Tuesday. That was my life. And by the time I got home that evening, my wife of 32 years would take one look at me across the kitchen counter and know before I said a single word that something was wrong. She always did know first. That was Marlene. Marlene was in the kitchen when I got home that night, peeling apples for a pie. She wore an old blue cardigan that I'd bought her for Christmas in 2009, the sleeves a little frayed at the cuffs because she refused to let me replace it. She heard the back door open and didn't turn around right away. She just kept peeling. "You're quiet tonight," she said, before I had so much as set my keys on the counter. Long day. That was the thing about Marlene. She didn't ask twice. She just let the silence sit between us until I was ready to fill it. We'd been married 32 years. She knew the difference between long day and something is wrong. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window over the sink. The maple tree in the backyard was almost bare now, the last of its red leaves clinging on, stubborn against the wind. My father had planted that tree the spring before he died, in 1998. He never lived to see it taller than my shoulder. Now it stood twice as tall as the roof of the house. They had a meeting today, I said finally. The new ownership group. And the new manager, the young one I told you about, he stood up there and gave a presentation. Quarterly strategy. He kept using a phrase, legacy talent restructuring. Marlene set down her peeler. She turned around and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. James. I know. That phrase means exactly what you think it means. I know. How many of them are there? The legacy talent. I had to think about it. Maybe 18, 20 of us. Anybody over 55? Anybody with more than 15 years in? The salaried ones, mostly. The ones who cost the most. She nodded slowly. She didn't say anything else for a while. She turned back to the apples and kept peeling. But I could see her shoulders had set in that way they do when she's already thinking 3 moves ahead. That was the night I should have started preparing. I see that now, but I didn't. I told myself it was just business jargon. I told myself that Brandon Cole could talk all he wanted, but the company still needed people who knew how the docs actually worked, who knew which dispatcher in St. Louis would take a Sunday call and which one wouldn't, who knew that the customs broker in Detroit had a daughter going through chemo and would need a little patience that month. I told myself the work would speak for itself. I had been telling myself that for 31 years, and it had always been true. But the work doesn't always speak. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room drowns it out. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that warning shots are quiet. Nothing big happened. That was almost the worst part. The first thing I noticed was that I stopped being copied on certain emails. A new logistics partnership was announced with a company in Indianapolis, and I learned about it from a press release that someone forwarded me. The week before, that kind of decision would have been mine to make. The week after, I wasn't even informed. The second thing was that the Monday morning operations meeting changed locations. Used to be we held it in the big conference room on the 2nd floor, and every department head was there. Then one Monday I walked up to the 2nd floor and found the room empty. I went down to my office, and there was an email waiting sent at 6 in the morning, explaining that the meeting had been streamlined and was now invitation only. My name wasn't on the invitation list. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a scene. I just walked back down to the warehouse floor and helped Earl rework a route schedule that the new dispatch software had botched. The third thing was the worst. A client of mine, a man named Hal Burgess, who ran a chain of hardware stores in 3 states. A client I had served personally for 19 years, called me one Wednesday afternoon. His voice was strained. "Seamus," he said. "Why am I getting a new account manager?" I sat down slowly in my desk chair. "What do you mean?" "Hal." I got a letter this morning. Says my account is being transitioned to a new representative, some kid named Tyler. I called the main line and they said you were being reassigned. James, what the hell is going on? I didn't have an answer for him. I told him I'd find out and call him back. I walked down the hall to Brandon Cole's office. The door was open. He was standing at his standing desk, looking at something on a tablet, wearing a half-zip pullover with a small logo on the chest that I didn't recognize. He looked up when I knocked. James, come in. What can I do for you? Hal Burgess just called me. He says his account has been reassigned. Brandon nodded thoughtfully, like a man pretending to consider a question he'd already answered for himself. Right. Yeah. Part of the new pipeline strategy. We're bucketing accounts by digital readiness and matching them to reps with the right toolkit. Hal's business is going through some changes. He needs someone who can speak the new language. Hal Burgess has been my client for 19 years. He just bought a new distribution center in Kentucky because I told him our network could handle it. And we appreciate everything you've done to build that relationship. That kind of legacy work is invaluable, but Tyler's going to take it from here. He smiled the smile I had come to dread. Trust me, James. This is the right call for the org. The org. He called the company the org. I stood there for another second, and then I just nodded once and walked out. I didn't trust myself to say anything else. That night, I called Hal back from my home office. I told him I had been reassigned. I told him Tyler was a good kid, even though I didn't actually know that yet. I told him to trust the process. I lied to a man I had served for 19 years because I didn't know what else to say. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. I took out the little notebook from my shirt pocket. I flipped through it slowly. Past Earl's entry, past Rosa's, past Mike's, past 100 others, most of the way to the back. I stopped on a page I hadn't looked at in a long time. There were 2 words on it, in handwriting from a much younger man. The ink had faded from black to a soft brown. Daniel, promise. I looked at that page for a long time. I almost reached for the phone. But I didn't. Not yet. Some debts you don't call in just because things are getting hard. You only call them in when there's nothing else left. I closed the notebook. I put it back in my shirt pocket. I went to bed beside my wife, and I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning was a Saturday. The kind of pale, cold Saturday that Northern Ohio specializes in around the first week of November. The sun was up, but it didn't seem to be doing much. The grass in the front yard had gone stiff with frost overnight, and there was a thin skin of ice on the birdbath beside the garage. I made coffee. I read the paper. Marlene was still asleep upstairs. I had the kitchen to myself, and the only sound in the house was the furnace clicking on every few minutes and the soft scrape of my own spoon against the cup. The Toledo Blade had a section that morning about regional infrastructure. Something about a new container terminal expansion at the Port of Cleveland. I almost flipped past it. I was halfway to the sports page when a name in the second column caught my eye, and I stopped. We'd announced in coordination with Port Director Daniel Rhee, who has overseen Cleveland's freight operations since 2011. I read that sentence again, and then a third time. I set the paper down on the kitchen table. I sat back in my chair. I looked out the window at the maple tree in the yard. Daniel Rhee. I hadn't said that name out loud in 11 years. There are some people in your life who pass through and leave nothing behind. There are others who pass through and leave a small, permanent mark, the kind you only notice when something brings it back to the surface. And there are a very few who don't pass through at all. They settle into a part of you that doesn't move. You can go decades without seeing them and still know exactly where they are inside you. Daniel was that kind. We had worked the night shift together at Whitman Harrison for 6 years, from the fall of 1988 until the spring of 1994. He was a couple of years older than me. He was the son of Korean immigrants who ran a dry cleaner in Cleveland. His father had died when Daniel was 19, and Daniel had taken night shifts at the warehouse to help his mother make rent on the cleaner while he went to community college in the daytime. He was the most disciplined human being I have ever known, and the most private. In the winter of 1993, something had happened between us. A small thing, in the scheme of a long life. The kind of thing two young men make a quiet promise about, and then never speak of again. I didn't open that drawer in my mind that Saturday morning. I just held the newspaper for a long time, and then I folded it carefully, and I set it on the shelf above the radiator where Marlene kept the bills she meant to file. She came downstairs about 20 minutes later, wrapped in her bathrobe, her hair still pinned up from sleep. She kissed the top of my head and went to the coffee pot. "Anything in the paper, Hunt?" she asked. "Just the usual." She gave me a long look over the rim of her cup, but she let it go. That was Marlene. The next week at Halberd was the worst yet. Brandon scheduled what he called a skills audit, which turned out to be a series of one-on-one meetings between him and each of the senior employees. I went into mine on a Thursday afternoon. He had his laptop open and a printed sheet in front of him. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't offer me coffee. He asked me a series of questions that I realized, about 3 questions in, were not really questions. They were boxes for him to check. Are you familiar with the new pipeline software? Have you completed the AI Fundamentals training module? What is your strategy for digital client engagement in the next quarter? I answered honestly. I told him I had been using the new software since it rolled out, that I had not yet completed the training module because the system kept locking me out, and that my strategy for client engagement in the next quarter was the same as it had been for the last 100 quarters: pick up the phone, drive to the client's office, and ask them what they needed. Brandon typed something into his laptop without looking up. Right. James. Listen, I want to be straight with you. The industry is changing. We're moving into an era of, AI-augmented decision-making, algorithmic routing, predictive load balancing. The skill set that built this company isn't necessarily the skill set that's going to scale this company. You understand? I do. And I think, and this is just me being transparent, I think there's a question of whether legacy talent like yourself can really make that transition. It's nothing personal. It's just data. I understand. I want you to spend some time thinking about your future here, about what role might still make sense. We'll talk again in 2 weeks. I stood up. I shook his hand, because that's what I do. Even when the other man hasn't offered. I walked out. I went home that night and didn't tell Marlene about it. I didn't know how. She could tell something else had happened. But for the first time in our marriage, when she asked, I just shook my head and said I was tired. She didn't push. Late that night, after she had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a single small lamp on and pulled the notebook out of my shirt pocket. I turned to the back page. I looked at those two words again. Daniel, promise. I thought about a winter night 32 years ago. I thought about the smell of diesel and cold steel and old cardboard. I thought about a paper bag with one ham sandwich in it, and a young man named Daniel Rhee, whose mother was lying in a hospital bed in Cleveland with pneumonia, and a misrouted shipment that could have ended his career before it started. I thought about what I had said to him that night, with my mouth full of cold bread and yellow mustard. Don't worry about it. Danny, I'll take the write-up. You go see your mother. And I thought about what he had said back to me, after a long silence, looking out at the snow falling sideways past the loading bay lights. Someday, that was all, just that one word. We never spoke of it again. He moved on from Whitman Harrison in the spring of 1994. We sent each other Christmas cards for a few years. Then the cards stopped, the way cards do. I heard he had moved into operations management at the Port of Cleveland. I heard he had done well. I never reached out. He never reached out. 31 years had gone by. I closed the notebook. I turned off the lamp. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the furnace click on and off, listening to the maple tree creak in the wind outside. I didn't know it yet, but the storm I had been feeling for weeks, the low hum at the back of my mind, the gray pressure behind my eyes was about to break. In 10 days, Brandon Cole would call a company-wide meeting. In 10 days, I would carry a cardboard box out of a building I had given 31 years of my life to. And 11 days after that, my phone would ring. But I didn't know any of that yet. I just sat in the dark, with a small notebook in my hand, and a quiet promise from a winter night long ago sitting like a stone in the middle of my chest. And outside, the wind kept moving through the maple tree my father had planted, the one he never lived to see grown. The morning Brandon Cole fired me. The sky over Toledo was the color of old pewter. I remember that clearly. The way you remember small things from the days that change your life. I had eaten breakfast at home. Marlene made oatmeal with brown sugar and a half a banana sliced on top, the way I'd been eating it for 30 years. She kissed me on the cheek before I walked out the door. She didn't say, "Have a good day." She said, "Be steady." I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say. I thought about it on the drive in. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the main conference room on the second floor. Brandon had sent the calendar invitation the night before. The subject line was Quarterly Realignment Mandatory Attendance. I had glanced at it before bed and thought nothing of it. We had all-hands meetings every quarter. They were usually boring. Brandon would put up slides. Someone would ask about the holiday bonus. Earl would fall asleep in the back row with his eyes half open, a skill he had perfected over 22 years. I walked in at 5 minutes to 10. The room was already packed. There were extra chairs along the back wall. People were standing in the doorway. I noticed that. I noticed that the room felt too full for a routine meeting. I noticed that Brandon was already at the front, fiddling with the projector, wearing a navy blue blazer over a black turtleneck, his hair freshly cut. He looked like a man dressed for a photograph. I found a seat near the middle, next to Earl. Earl looked at me sideways. "You see the email this morning," he whispered. "What email?" "6 of, from corporate, new org chart attached." I had not seen the email, I had been driving in by 6 Your name on it? I asked. Earl didn't answer right away. He just shook his head slowly. That was the moment my stomach turned over. Not before. Not at the door. Not at the parking lot. Not on the drive in. That was the moment. When Earl Coleman, who had not been afraid of anything in 22 years, would not meet my eyes. Brandon began the meeting at 10 o'clock exactly. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked for about 4 minutes about company momentum, about the energy of the new ownership group, about how Halberd was poised to enter what he called a transformational chapter. He used the word transformational twice. He used the word velocity 3 times. He put up a slide with arrows on it. And then he changed the slide. The next slide was a list of names, about 20 of them. My name was the third from the top. As part of our ongoing optimization, Brandon said, in that even, almost cheerful voice he used when he was about to say something cruel. We're making some difficult decisions today. The colleagues you see listed here represent talent that has served Halberd faithfully for many years. We want to honor that service, but the market is changing, and we have to change with it. Effective immediately. The roles listed on this slide will be eliminated. There was a sound in the room, not a gasp, exactly. More like the sound 20 people make when they all draw a breath at the same time without meaning to. I sat very still. I felt my heart beating in my chest. But it was beating slowly, the way it does in a doctor's office when you're trying to lower your blood pressure for the cuff. Brandon went on. He talked about severance. He talked about transition support. He talked about honoring the legacy of the people whose careers he had just ended on a projector slide. And then he made a mistake. Maybe he meant to make it. Maybe he couldn't help himself. Maybe somewhere in his expensive education, nobody had ever told him that a man who wins a war shouldn't desecrate the bodies. He looked out across the room, and he said, "Look, I know this is hard. I know change is hard. But I want to be honest with all of you. The era of the handshake and the Rolodex is over. We're moving into an era of data, of algorithms, of AI-augmented decision-making. The skill set that built this company isn't the skill set that's going to scale it. The era of $1,000 thinkers has begun. The folks on this slide, they served their time. We salute them. But their time is over." He let that sentence hang in the room. Their time is over. I felt Earl's hand land on my forearm. Heavy, steadying. He didn't look at me. He just kept his hand there. I don't remember the rest of the meeting. I remember being asked to come to a separate room afterward to meet with HR and sign paperwork. I remember the HR woman, whose name was Karen, crying quietly while she handed me the severance packet. She had been at Halberd for 18 years. I had been at her wedding. I had given her a card when her father died. "James," she said, "I am so sorry. I want you to know I tried." "I know you did, Karen. This isn't right." "I know." I signed the papers. I didn't read them. I didn't ask questions. I figured I'd read them at home, with Marlene, when my hands weren't doing whatever they were doing. They gave me an hour to pack my office. That hour was the longest of my life. My office wasn't much. It was a corner room on the first floor with a window that looked out at the loading yard, a metal desk, 2 filing cabinets, a bookshelf with 3-ring binders going back to 1998, a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss" that Hannah had given me for Father's Day when she was in college, a small framed photograph of Marlene at the lake in 1991, the year before we got married, squinting into the sun. There was a cardboard box on my desk when I walked in. Someone had left it there, already flattened and waiting for me. I don't know who. I didn't ask. I sat down in my chair. I looked around. I tried to figure out what to take. The binders. No. Those belonged to the company. The mug. Yes. The photo of Marlene. Yes. A small porcelain figurine of a freight train that Earl had given me for my 50th birthday. Yes. A coffee thermos. A pair of work gloves I kept in the bottom drawer. A folder of personal correspondence birthday cards from employees. A few handwritten notes. A Christmas card from a customs broker in Detroit whose daughter had finished chemotherapy and was now in remission. Yes to that whole folder. I packed slowly. I tried to be methodical. I think I was trying to give myself something to do with my hands. Because if I had stopped moving, I don't know what would have happened. There was a knock on my door about 20 minutes in. It was Rosa Delgado, the inventory manager. Her eyes were red. "James," she said. She didn't come in. "Hi, Rosa. Were you on the list?" "I was." She put her hand to her mouth. She turned away from the door for a second. When she turned back, she had pulled herself together a little. "Look, this is wrong. James, this is so wrong." "I know. I worked for you for 15 years. I know, Rosa. You hired me when I had 2 kids and no English and a car that didn't run. I remember. You let me leave early every Thursday for 2 years so I could pick up Sophia from her after-school program. Rosa, I remember." She started crying then. She didn't try to stop. She just stood in the doorway and let the tears come. And I stood up from my desk, and I walked over, and I hugged her. And I told her she was going to be all right, and that she was the best inventory manager I had ever worked with, and that any company in Toledo would be lucky to have her. She left after a few minutes. I watched her walk down the hall. She didn't look back. I finished packing the box. I closed it up. It wasn't very heavy. 31 years should weigh more than that. I remember thinking, 31 years should weigh as much as a man can carry. I sat back down in my chair for a minute. I looked out the window at the loading yard. I watched 2 of our drivers loading pallets onto a truck for a run to Indianapolis. They didn't know yet. I knew the dispatcher who had assigned them that run. I knew that one of them, the one in the green jacket, had a daughter starting at Ohio State in the fall. I knew that the other one was a recovering alcoholic who had been sober for 8 years and who came to me once a year, every year, to ask if I could schedule his runs to avoid St. Patrick's Day weekend. That was the part that hurt the most, sitting at that desk. Not what I was losing, what they were losing. They didn't know it yet. But the man who remembered things like that was about to walk out the door, and the man taking over didn't remember anything that couldn't fit on a spreadsheet. I reached into my shirt pocket. I pulled out the small spiral notebook. I held it for a moment. I almost left it on the desk. I want to be honest about that. There was a moment, sitting in that chair, when I thought maybe the notebook belonged to the company. Maybe it was a tool of the job, and the job was over. Maybe it was time to set it down and walk out lighter. But I couldn't do it. I put the notebook back in my shirt pocket. I picked up the box. I stood up. I walked out of my office. I walked down the hall. I walked past the dispatch room, where Earl was already on the phone with someone, his back to me. He had heard the door open and he didn't turn around. I understood. He couldn't. I walked past the warehouse floor. Rosa was there. Mike Stoll was there. A young man named Diego, whom I had hired 3 months ago, was there. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They just stood and watched me walk past. That's the part that came back to me later, again and again. Not Brandon's words, not the projector slide, not the HR paperwork. That walk down the hall, with the box in my arms, past men and women who had been my family for 31 years, and the silence of them not knowing what to say. I walked through the front lobby. Tony, the security guard, was at his desk. Tony was 67 years old. His wife had passed 2 years ago. His youngest son had gotten a scholarship to a community college on a recommendation letter I had written. Tony stood up when he saw me. He stood up like he was at a funeral. "James," he said. I couldn't answer. I just shook my head. He came out from behind his desk. He took the box out of my hands. He carried it for me to the front door. He held the door open with his shoulder. "You let me get the other one too. James, you wait here." He walked back inside. I stood at the door for a second, blinking at the gray November sky, the wind off the lake cutting through my coat. Tony came back out with a second box. I hadn't realized there had been a second box. I hadn't realized I had that much. He walked me to my truck. He set both boxes in the bed. He turned to me. There were tears in his eyes that he wasn't bothering to hide. "You were the best man in that building, James. They don't know what they just did." "Thank you, Tony. You hear me? They don't know what they just did." I nodded. I couldn't say anything. I got into my truck. I sat in the cab. I watched Tony walk back to the front door of the building, his shoulders shaking a little. I sat in that truck for a long time before I turned the key. I don't remember driving home. I remember pulling into the driveway. I remember sitting in the truck again, for a second time that day, looking at the front door of my own house and trying to figure out how I was supposed to walk through it. Marlene was in the backyard. I could see her through the side window. She was raking leaves. She had a wool hat pulled down over her ears, and she was wearing her old red gardening jacket. And she was working in that slow, steady way. She had the rhythm of a woman who'd raked 32 autumns worth of leaves in this yard and wasn't in any hurry about the 33rd. I got out of the truck. I pulled both boxes from the bed. I set them on the porch. I didn't take them inside yet. I walked around to the side of the house. Marlene saw me coming. She straightened up. She held the rake with both hands. She looked at me across the yard. She didn't have to ask. She knew. She set the rake down against the trunk of the maple tree. She walked across the yard toward me. When she reached me, she didn't say anything. She just put both her arms around me right there in the cold backyard, with the wind moving through the bare branches over our heads, and she held me. I am not a man who cries. I was raised by a father who didn't cry, and I learned the lesson the way boys did in those days. I had cried twice in my adult life when Hannah was born, and when my father passed. That was it. I cried that afternoon in the backyard. I cried into the shoulder of my wife's red gardening jacket, with my arms wrapped around her, with my face pressed into the wool. She didn't shush me. She didn't tell me it was going to be all right. She didn't say a single word. She just held on. After a while, I straightened up. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. She kept one hand on my arm. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." We brought the boxes in. We set them on the dining room table. She made coffee. She sat down across from me at the kitchen counter. The kitchen smelled like the cinnamon from yesterday's pie crust. I told her all of it. The meeting, the slide, the words Brandon had used, the HR paperwork, Rosa crying in my doorway, Tony carrying my box, the walk past the warehouse floor. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She let me get all the way through it. When I was done, she was quiet for a long moment. She stirred her coffee with a spoon, even though she drinks it black. "James," she said finally. "Yeah. You are not the things he said about you in that room." "I know. I don't think you do. Not yet." She set the spoon down. She put her hand over mine on the counter. "You are not outdated. You are not over. You are not a phase the world has moved past. He doesn't know who you are. He has met the version of you that fits on a spreadsheet, and that's all. He doesn't know the man I married." I looked down at our hands. "I just don't know what I'm supposed to do tomorrow morning. Marlene, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself." "You're going to wake up at the same time you always wake up. You're going to shave. You're going to put on a clean shirt. You're going to eat breakfast. And then you and I are going to figure out the next part. Together. Like we have figured out every other part." I nodded. I couldn't quite trust my voice. She squeezed my hand. Then she stood up. She went to the fridge and started taking things out for dinner. She was making meatloaf. She always made meatloaf when something was hard. She had made meatloaf the night my father died. She had made meatloaf the night Hannah broke up with her first serious boyfriend. She had made meatloaf the night the tornado in 2010 had taken the roof off our garden shed. I sat at the counter and watched her work. The afternoon light was fading outside the kitchen window. The maple tree was bare against the gray sky. I called Hannah that evening. I told her what had happened. She was quiet on the phone for a long time. She is her mother's daughter that way. When she finally spoke, she said, "Dad, listen. There is no version of this where you are the one who failed. Do you hear me? There is no version of this story where you are the one who failed." I told her I heard her. I'm not sure I believed her. Not that first night, but I told her I heard her. That night, I lay in bed beside Marlene and stared at the ceiling. The wind was up outside. The branches of the maple were scratching against the gutter the way they always did in November. I had heard that sound on 1,000 other nights and never noticed it. That night, it was the loudest sound in the world. Marlene rolled over at some point. She put her hand on my chest. "Sleep, James. I'm trying." Try harder, you'll need it. She fell asleep. I lay there a while longer. Then I got up. I went downstairs. I sat in the dark kitchen with the small lamp on, and I pulled the notebook out from the breast pocket of the shirt I had laid over the back of the chair. I turned the pages slowly. Earl Coleman, Rosa Delgado, Mike Stoll, Tony at the front desk, Diego the new kid I'd hired 3 months ago, Dolores at Ruthie's, Karen in HR, 100 others, dispatchers and drivers and customs brokers and port agents and warehouse foremen, wives and husbands and sons and daughters and the dogs they had named after their grandfathers. It was all in there. I looked at that notebook for a long time, in the dim circle of the kitchen lamp, and I thought about what Marlene had said. You are not outdated. You are not over. I closed the notebook. I went back to bed. I still didn't sleep much, but somewhere in the dark, around 4 in the morning, I made myself a small promise. I would not let Brandon Cole's view of me become my view of myself. That was the only promise I had room for that night, but it was a place to start. The first week was the worst, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, grinding, terrible way. I woke up at 5:15, the same as I had for 31 years. I shaved. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen counter with my coffee and stared at the wall. There was nowhere to go. That was the thing nobody warns you about. The hours don't stop just because the job does. They keep coming. 5:30 becomes 6. 6 becomes 7. 7 becomes the time I would have been walking into Halberd, nodding to Tony at the front desk, dropping my bag at my office. And I was still sitting on the same stool, in the same kitchen, with a cold cup of coffee in my hand. The first morning, I tried to make a plan. I got out a yellow legal pad. I wrote things to do at the top. I wrote clean garage. I wrote update resume. I wrote call about Cobra. I wrote fix back fence. I looked at the list. It looked like 4 things you could do in 2 days. I had decades of time in front of me. I tried to stay busy. I cleaned the garage. It took me a day and a half. I drove to the hardware store. I came back. I worked on the back fence. I drove to the hardware store again. I came back. I sat in the kitchen. I waited for it to be time to make dinner. The phone didn't ring much. That was the part that surprised me. Looking back, word travels in a small industry. People knew, but people don't always know what to say. A few old friends called. Hal Burgess, my hardware store client, called twice. The first time he just wanted to make sure I was all right. The second time he wanted to know if I could consult for him directly, off the books. I thanked him and told him I needed a few weeks to figure things out. I didn't want to start something I couldn't finish. Earl called me on the 3rd day. He didn't say much. He just wanted to hear my voice. He told me that Brandon had restructured dispatch and that the new system was already losing loads. He told me that Rosa had been put on a performance plan. He told me that there was a rumor Mike Stoll would be next. James, Earl said, this place is falling apart. It's been 2 weeks and this place is falling apart. I'm sorry, Earl. Don't apologize. It ain't your doing. I just mean I'm sorry I can't be there. I know what you mean. There was a silence on the line. You doing all right? He asked. I'm doing. That ain't an answer. I know. Earl was quiet for another moment. You ever need anything, James, anything, you call me. I know, Earl, same goes. That was the call. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after I hung up. I had thought, all those years, that I was the one taking care of those people. Earl, Rosa, Mike, Tony, Karen, Diego. I had thought the notebook in my pocket was a record of my responsibilities to them. It hadn't occurred to me until that phone call that maybe the notebook was also a record of theirs to me, that it had been a two-way ledger all along, that the names on those pages were not just people I had carried. They were people who had carried me too. That was a thought I had to sit with for a while. The second week was a little easier and a little harder. Easier because I had figured out a rhythm. I walked in the mornings, 2 miles around the neighborhood, before the sun was fully up. I came back. I shaved. I had breakfast with Marlene. I worked on the house. I read. I had not read a book front to back since 2019. I started one called Plain Words by a British civil servant from the 1940s. It was about how to write clearly. I don't know why I picked it. It was on the shelf. I read it slowly. It calmed me. Harder, because that's when the shame started to settle in. I started avoiding Ruthie's. I told myself it was just to save money. The truth was, I didn't want to walk in and have Dolores ask me how things were going. I didn't want to see the regulars. I didn't want to answer questions. I started avoiding the grocery store on Saturdays, when I used to do the shopping with Marlene. There was a woman who worked the deli counter whose husband had worked the loading dock at Halberd in the late 90s. I didn't want to see her either. One afternoon, I drove to the grocery store on my own. I parked in the lot. I sat in the truck. I watched people walking in and out of the automatic doors. I watched for 20 minutes. Then I started the truck and drove home without going in. I lied to Marlene about that one. I told her they were out of what we needed. She knew. She didn't say anything, but she knew. The third week, something shifted. It wasn't a single moment. It was more like the slow turn of a season. I was on the back porch one evening. The sun was setting. The maple tree was completely bare now, just a black sculpture against an orange sky. Marlene came out and sat down next to me. She had a blanket. She put half of it over her lap and half over mine. We sat for a while. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "James, I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen all the way through before you answer." "All right." "I have watched you for 3 weeks now. I have watched you hide. I have watched you avoid Ruthie's and Earl's calls and the grocery store. I have watched you avoid the mirror. I have watched you make yourself smaller in this house, day by day, like a man trying not to be noticed in his own home." I didn't answer. I just looked at the bare branches of the maple. "I am not angry with you. I want to say that first. I am not angry. I love you. I love you the way I loved you when you came home from that night shift at Whitman Harrison in 1993 with your hands black from the loading dock and your eyes bright because you'd done a hard thing well. I love you the way I loved you the day Hannah was born, and you held her and you cried into the blanket like a man who had just been handed the whole world. I love you the way I loved you yesterday and the way I will love you tomorrow. She paused. The wind moved a little. I could feel her looking at me. But James, I cannot watch you become a man who agrees with Brandon Cole about who you are. I will not watch that. You are bigger than what happened in that room. You are bigger than that boy and his slide. And if you let him be the last word on who you are, then he wins. And I did not marry a man who lets the wrong people have the last word. She stopped. I sat with that for a long time. The orange in the sky was fading to a darker blue. The first star was coming out somewhere over the neighbor's roof. I reached over under the blanket and I took her hand. "All right," I said. "All right. Marlene." That was all I said, but something inside my chest, some weight I had been carrying for 3 weeks without knowing how heavy it was, set itself down. The next morning I went to Ruthie's. I walked in at 6:15. The bell jingled. Dolores looked up from the register. She didn't smile, exactly. She just looked at me the way she always looked at me, like I had never been gone, like the world hadn't shifted at all in the last 3 weeks. "2 eggs, wheat toast, no jelly?" she asked. "2 eggs, wheat toast, no jelly." "Coffee's already poured. Take the booth." I took the booth. She brought the coffee. She set it down. She did not linger. She did not pry. She gave me what she had always given me, the small dignity of being treated like a regular human being on an ordinary morning. 2 of the other regulars nodded at me from across the room. An older man named Walter, who'd retired from the Jeep plant back in 2007, lifted his coffee cup in a small salute. That was all. Nobody asked questions. Nobody made it a moment. But I'll tell you something. I sat in that booth, and I ate my eggs and my wheat toast, and I drank my black coffee, and I watched the headlights pass on Lagrange Street the way I had on 1,000 other mornings. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt like I was still a person. That was the small turn. I started going to Ruthie's every morning. Not every day at first, twice that first week. Then 4 times. Then every weekday. I started talking to Walter. He had 10 years on me and a lot of opinions about what to do with a sudden, unexpected stretch of empty mornings. He had been through it himself. He told me that the trick was not to fill the time, but to let the time fill you back up. I didn't fully understand that at first, but I held on to it. I started returning Earl's calls. I told him I wanted to know what was going on at Halberd, not because I wanted to be back in it, because the people I cared about were still in it. What he told me was not good. Brandon had pushed through a series of changes to the operations side. The new dispatch software, which had cost the company a great deal of money, was misrouting loads at almost double the historic rate. The young man who had taken over my client accounts, Tyler, had lost 3 major contracts in 2 weeks. Hal Burgess had taken his business to a competitor in Indianapolis. So had a regional grocery chain I had served for 14 years. So had a freight broker out of Pittsburgh, who had been one of our biggest partners since 2008. The number that worried Earl the most, though, was a customs delay. A major shipment, one of the largest contracts Halberd had ever taken on, was being held at the Port of Cleveland because of a paperwork failure. The new compliance director, the kid from Boston, had filed the wrong documentation. The shipment was sitting in a bonded warehouse, racking up storage fees. and the client, a major manufacturing firm out of Cincinnati, was threatening to pull the contract entirely. "James," Earl said, "they need to talk to the port director. They can't get him on the phone." I went very still on my end of the line. "What do you mean, they can't get him on the phone?" "Brandon's been calling the port for a week. The director won't take the call, won't take a meeting. They sent a delegation up there on Tuesday, and security wouldn't let them past the lobby. There's something going on. I don't know what. But the director up there, Daniel Ray, he's apparently a ghost. Nobody at Halberd has ever met him. The man does not return calls." I didn't say anything for a long moment. "James, you there?" "I'm here, Earl." "You know him, don't you, Daniel Ree?" I didn't answer that directly. "Earl, listen. I appreciate you telling me. I really do. But I need you to keep me out of it. I'm not going to insert myself into Halberd's problems. That's not my place anymore." "I understand. I just thought you should know what was happening." "I do appreciate it." We hung up. I sat at the kitchen counter for a long time. I knew that Halberd, under Brandon, had a problem he could not solve. I knew that the problem could probably be solved by a single phone call from me. I knew that if I picked up the phone right then and called the Port of Cleveland and asked to be put through to Daniel Ree, I would probably be put through within 5 minutes. And I knew I was not going to do it. Not because of pride, not because of revenge, but because the promise written in my notebook from a winter night in 1993 was not a chip to be cashed in to save the career of a man who had publicly mocked me. It belonged to me and Daniel. It was the last thing in this world I owned that Brandon Cole could not touch. And if I picked up the phone and called Daniel to bail out Halberd, I would be turning a 30-year friendship into a transaction. I would be doing the very thing Brandon believed people like me did, trading on legacy relationships to compensate for being outdated. I was not going to give him that satisfaction, even if he never knew about it. I told Marlene about the call that night. She listened. When I was done, she said, "James, are you sure you're making this decision for the right reasons, not out of pride, not out of stubbornness, but for the right reasons?" I thought about it for a long time. "I am sure," I said. "If Daniel ever calls me, he will call me on his own. I am not going to pull on that thread. Not for Brandon, not for Halberd, not for anyone." She nodded once. "All right then." That was the 3rd week. What I did not know, what I could not have known. Sitting at my kitchen counter that night, with the bare maple tree black against the window, was that Daniel Ree was, at that very moment, 300 miles away in an office overlooking the gray water of Lake Erie, holding a folded copy of the Toledo Blade in his hand. He had circled a name in blue ink. The name was Halberd Freight and Logistics, and next to it, in the margin, in handwriting I would recognize from 1,000 night shifts at Whitman Harrison, he had written a single word: James. But I didn't know that yet. I closed up the kitchen. I went up to bed. I lay down beside Marlene. The wind moved through the bare branches of the maple, the one my father planted, outside, somewhere down the street. A dog barked once and then went quiet. I slept that night. For the first time in 3 weeks, I slept all the way through. When I woke up the next morning, it would be a Thursday. And Thursday was the day my phone rang. That Thursday started like any other day in my new life. I woke up at 5:15. I shaved. I put on a flannel shirt and a pair of jeans that fit a little looser than they had a month before. I went downstairs. I made coffee. I read the paper. Marlene came down around 6:30. She kissed the top of my head. She poured her own coffee. She sat down across from me at the counter. "You going to Ruthie's?" she asked. "In a little while." "Walter going to be there?" "He's there every morning." "To tell him I said hello, and tell him to bring me some of those tomatoes from his greenhouse when they come in. I'm tired of the ones at Kroger." I told her I would. That was the morning. That was how it began. Two people in a quiet kitchen, talking about tomatoes. I went to Ruthie's. I had my eggs. I sat with Walter for an hour. He told me about his granddaughter, who had just been accepted to a nursing program at the University of Toledo. He asked me about Hannah. I told him she was thinking about adopting a dog. He told me about a dog he'd had in the 1970s named Boots, who had bitten everyone in the family at least once, but who he had loved anyway. That was the kind of conversation I was having now. That was the kind of morning. There was a peace in it I hadn't expected. The world had not ended. It had just gotten smaller and slower. And there was. I was beginning to understand. A kind of grace in that. I drove home around 9. I worked on the back fence. I'd been working on it off and on for a month, replacing the posts one at a time. I had about 3 left to do. It was the kind of project that, if I'd been working full-time, would have taken me one Saturday. Now I was stretching it across the calendar like a man rationing the last of a winter's supply of firewood. At 11:37 in the morning, I remember the time because I looked at the kitchen clock right after the house phone rang. We still had a landline. Marlene had kept it through 3 different conversations about getting rid of it. She said her sister still called on it, and it would be rude to make her switch. The phone sat on a little table in the front hallway, beside a lamp and a small dish where I kept loose change. I came in from the backyard. My hands were dirty from the fence work. I wiped them on a rag and picked up the phone. "Whitaker residence." There was a half-second of silence on the other end, just long enough for me to almost say hello again. And then a voice I had not heard in 11 years. "James." That was all, just my name. But I knew. I knew before he said anything else. There is something about a voice you worked alongside in your 20s, a voice you heard across a cold warehouse floor on 1,000 winter nights that doesn't change. The years rub down a few of the edges. The pitch settles a little, but the shape of it stays the same. "Danny," I said. Another small silence. "It's been a while," he said. "It has." "I read about the takeover, Viridian. I read about it 3 months ago. I figured you might have. I wasn't sure if you were still there. I should have called sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." "You had your reasons." "I did. Doesn't make it right." I leaned against the wall of the hallway. The dish of loose change rattled a little when my elbow knocked the table. I looked down at it. "And Danny, why are you calling?" He took a breath. I could hear it through the line. He's always done that, before he says something important. A small breath. Almost a sigh. I had forgotten that until I heard it again. James, can you come to Cleveland tomorrow, just for the morning? I'll send a car if you need one. I'd come to you. But there's a meeting I need to have. And I'd like you there. What kind of meeting? I'll explain when you get here. I'd rather not do it over the phone. I thought about it. I thought about it for maybe 4 seconds. Then I said, I'll drive. I'll be there by 9. My office is at the main administrative building. Tell the front desk you're here for me. They'll know. All right. There was another pause. Then he said, in a quieter voice, James, I'm sorry. About what happened. About all of it. You don't owe me an apology, Danny. I'm not apologizing because I owe it to you. I'm apologizing because it makes me sick to think of. I didn't know what to say to that. I just held the phone for a moment. I'll see you tomorrow, Danny. Tomorrow. He hung up. I stood in the hallway for a long time, holding the receiver until the dial tone reminded me to set it down. Marlene came around the corner from the kitchen. She had heard most of it, or all of it. I couldn't tell. She had a dish towel in her hand, and she stood very still, the way she does when she's waiting to see how I'm going to be. That was Daniel Rhee, I said. She nodded. He wants me to come to Cleveland tomorrow morning. She nodded again. I waited for her to say something. She didn't. She just looked at me, steady, calm. The way she had looked at me in the backyard on the afternoon I came home with the box. Marlene, what do I do? She set the dish towel on the counter. She walked over to me. She put her hand on my chest, flat over my shirt pocket, where the small notebook sat against my heart. You go, she said. You drive to Cleveland. You hear what the man has to say. You don't have to decide anything else today. You just have to go. All right. And James, whatever it is, whatever he wants, you come home and we talk about it before you say yes to anything. You hear me? I hear you. She kissed me. Then she went back to the kitchen. I stood in the hallway for another minute. Then I picked up the dish of loose change and rattled it absently. Quarters, dimes, a nickel from 1967 that my father had given me, 30 cents in pennies, a small inheritance from a long, ordinary life. I put the dish back on the table. I went back outside to finish the fence post I'd been working on. My hands were not entirely steady, but I worked anyway, because that was what I knew how to do. That night, after Marlene had gone to bed, I went down to the kitchen. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon from the bottle we kept above the refrigerator for Christmas guests. I sat down at the kitchen table. I took the notebook out of my shirt pocket and laid it on the table in front of me, unopened. And I let myself remember. I had not let myself remember properly in 30 years. Not the whole memory, with all the cold and the diesel smell and the yellow lights and the snow. I had kept it folded up, like a letter you put in a drawer and don't open because opening it would mean having to feel something you set down a long time ago. But that night, with a phone call from Cleveland sitting between me and the next morning, I let it come back. It was January of 1993, the night of January the 8th. I remember the date because we'd had a snowstorm on the 7th that had closed half the roads in Lucas County, and the 8th was the night they reopened the routes, and the warehouse ran a triple shift to catch up. I was 25 years old. I'd been at Whitman Harrison for 3 months. Marlene and I had been married for 6 weeks. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment on Sylvania Avenue with a radiator that banged like a hammer and a refrigerator that ran too cold. I made $9.40 an hour. We were saving up to put down a payment on a house. We figured we'd need another 3 years. Daniel Rhee was the senior man on the night shift. He was 27. He'd been at Whitman Harrison for almost 2 years. He had a small mustache he was trying to grow, which never quite came in right. He wore the same gray Carhartt jacket every winter. He was famous in the warehouse for never raising his voice and for being able to find any pallet in the building in under 3 minutes. His mother was at Cleveland Clinic. She had pneumonia that had turned into something worse. Daniel had been driving up there every Sunday to see her. The doctors were saying it was a matter of weeks. He hadn't told the warehouse manager. He hadn't told anyone. He couldn't afford to take time off. The dry cleaner his mother owned was barely making rent, and his sister, who was supposed to be running it while their mother was in the hospital, was 19 years old and overwhelmed. Daniel was sending half his paycheck home to keep the doors open. He was running on 3 hours of sleep a night. I knew because we worked next to each other. You learn things about a man when you work next to him on a night shift in January. You learn how he holds his shoulders when he's tired. You learn how he stops being able to crack a joke about the 3rd hour. You learn that he eats his lunch out of a brown paper bag with a single sandwich in it, and that some nights he doesn't eat at all. The night of January the 8th, we were processing a shipment of automotive parts coming in from a supplier in Indiana, carburetors and alternators bound for a Ford plant in Michigan. The paperwork was a mess. The trucker had brought in 2 different bills of lading, neither of which matched the actual contents of the trailer. It was the kind of administrative nightmare that, if it wasn't sorted out by morning, could result in the load being rejected at the receiving plant and the entire shipment being charged back to Whitman Harrison. Daniel was working the paperwork side. I was on the floor with the forklift. Around 2 in the morning, Daniel made a mistake, a small one. He logged the shipment under the wrong reference number in the system, 3 digits, an 8 where there should have been a 0, or something like that. I don't remember the exact details now. What I do remember is what happened next. The shipment was a high-priority load. It came up on the supervisor's overnight printout. When the morning shift came in, the supervisor, a man named Buck Patterson, who had been at Whitman Harrison for 30 years and who did not like Daniel Rhee for reasons that were never spoken aloud, but were obvious to anyone with eyes saw the mismatched paperwork. He pulled the system log. He found Daniel's mistake. Buck Patterson had been looking for a reason to fire Daniel for about 6 months. He didn't like the way Daniel spoke too quietly. He didn't like that Daniel was college educated. He didn't like, I think it's fair to say, that Daniel was Korean. He'd never have said it that way. He'd have said he didn't like types. But that was what it was. This mistake would have been Buck's reason. A high-priority load logged incorrectly. Potential chargeback. Disciplinary action up to and including termination. It was about 3 in the morning when I figured out what was about to happen. Daniel had clocked out and was sitting in the break room with his head in his hands. I knew he was thinking about his mother. I knew he was thinking about the dry cleaner. I knew he was thinking about his sister, who couldn't run the place alone for another 3 months. I went into the break room. I sat down across from him. I had half a ham sandwich in a brown bag, the only thing I had left from my lunch. I pushed it across the table to him. "Eat," I said. "I'm not hungry." "Daniel, eat the sandwich." He looked up at me. His eyes were red. He hadn't been crying, but he was close to it. In the way a man is close to it when he hasn't slept properly in a month. "James," he said, "I logged the load under the wrong number. Buck's going to find it in the morning." "I know. I've been on the system. I saw it." "He's going to fire me." "He might. I can't lose this job." "I know you can't." I took the sandwich back. I unwrapped it. I tore it in half. I gave him half. I ate the other half. We sat in silence for a while. The fluorescent light in the break room buzzed. Somewhere out on the floor, a forklift beeped. "Daniel," I said, "when the morning shift comes in, I'm going to go to Buck. I'm going to tell him that I logged the load. I was on the forklift. I came in to relieve you while you used the bathroom, and I entered the reference number wrong before you got back." "James, no. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. You go home. You sleep for 2 hours. Then you drive up to Cleveland and see your mother. I'll handle Buck. He likes me well enough. He'll yell at me. He might dock me a day's pay. He's not going to fire me over 3 digits. James. Daniel." He looked at me for a long time. He was holding the half sandwich in his hand. He hadn't taken a bite yet. "Why," he said. I thought about it for a second. I didn't have a clean answer. I just said the truest thing I could think of. "Because your mother is dying, and mine isn't. That's the whole reason. There isn't a better one." He looked down at the table. He didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. The light buzzed. A forklift beeped. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. He just looked at me. He took a bite of the sandwich. He chewed. He swallowed. Then he said the one word I would remember for the next 32 years. "Someday." That was all. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say I owe you. He just said someday. And I knew exactly what he meant. I knew it the way one young man knows what another young man means when they are at the bottom of a hard winter and trying to hold each other up. That was the promise. I went out to Buck Patterson at 6 in the morning. I told him I'd made the mistake. He yelled at me for 20 minutes and docked me a day's pay. Daniel slept the 2 hours and drove to Cleveland. His mother died 11 days later. He was holding her hand when she went. He stayed at Whitman Harrison for another 1.5 years. We worked next to each other through the rest of that winter and most of the spring. Then he got a job at the Port of Cleveland in the summer of 1994. He came by the warehouse one last time to drop off his uniform. He shook my hand at the loading bay door. He didn't say much. Neither did I. We sent Christmas cards. They stopped. The way Christmas cards do. We lost touch. 11 years went by. Then 20. Then 30. But the word had been said, and the word had been heard. And I had written it in my notebook, in a young man's careful hand, on a page I rarely opened. Daniel, promise. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time that night with the bourbon and the notebook. I didn't open the notebook. I didn't need to. The page was already open inside me. Around midnight, I went up to bed. Marlene was awake. She was lying on her back, looking at the ceiling. "Did you remember?" she asked, without turning her head. "I did." "Was it bad?" "No. It was the best memory I have." She rolled over and put her arm across my chest. "Drive safe tomorrow," she said. I would. I left the house at 6:30 in the morning. The sky was a pale silver. The temperature outside the kitchen window read 28 degrees. There was frost on the windshield of the truck, and I sat for a few minutes with the defroster running, watching the ice retreat from the glass. Marlene came out to the driveway in her bathrobe with a thermos of coffee. She tapped on the window. I rolled it down. "Don't speed," she said. "I won't." "And eat something. You didn't eat breakfast." She handed me a paper bag through the window. There was a banana in it and a piece of buttered toast wrapped in foil. "Thank you. Call me when you're done. I don't care what time it is. I want to know." "I will." She put her hand against my cheek for a second. Her fingers were cold. Then she stepped back, pulled her robe tighter, and went back inside. I pulled out of the driveway. I took Lagrange Street to the interstate. I picked up Interstate 80 going east. It is about 120 miles from my driveway to the Port of Cleveland. On a clear morning with light traffic, it's a 2-hour drive. I drove it that morning with the radio off. The window cracked an inch, and the thermos of coffee on the passenger seat next to me. I had the notebook in my shirt pocket, against my chest. I had on the brown leather belt my father had given me. I had on a clean white shirt and a navy blazer that I had not worn since Hannah's college graduation in 2014. I had polished my shoes the night before, sitting on the back porch with a rag and a tin of kiwi polish. I had not polished my shoes in 11 months. I am not a man who knows how to be nervous. Exactly. I don't pace. I don't sweat. I don't lose my appetite. What I do, when I'm nervous, is get very quiet. My hands work fine. My voice works fine. But I stop having any words to spare. I had a lot of nothing to say to myself, driving east on Interstate 80 that morning. I thought about Daniel. I tried to picture what he would look like now. The last time I'd seen him, in person, was in 1994, at the loading bay door of Whitman Harrison. He had been 28. He had the mustache that didn't quite come in. He had the gray Carhartt jacket. I had a photograph of him somewhere in a box in the attic, taken at a Christmas party in 1992. Marlene had taken it. He was standing next to me with a paper cup of punch in his hand, looking embarrassed to be in the picture. The man I was driving to see was 61 years old. He ran one of the largest ports on the Great Lakes. He had been doing it for 14 years. His name was in the newspaper. He had a board he reported to, and probably a staff of hundreds. He was, by any measure that the world would use, an important man. I tried to picture him in an office. I couldn't quite do it. I picked up coffee at a truck stop outside of Sandusky. The woman behind the counter was older than me. She had silver hair pinned up in a way that reminded me of my mother. She made small talk about the weather. I made small talk back. I tipped her $2 on a $4 coffee. She thanked me by my first name, which she had read off my credit card. I got back in the truck. I drank the coffee. I ate the toast and the banana that Marlene had packed. I drove. Around 8:30, I crossed the bridge into Cleveland. The city rose up out of the lake mist like something a child had cut out of gray paper. The downtown buildings caught the early sun. The water of Lake Erie was a flat, hard sheet to the north. I had grown up 60 miles west of here, and I had been to this city 100 times, and it still surprised me, every time, how big the lake looked from the bridge. The Port of Cleveland sits east of the downtown, along the lakefront. The main administrative building is a 4-story brick structure from the 1960s. I had been past it before, on dispatch runs, but I had never been inside. I pulled into the visitor lot at 20 minutes to 9. I parked the truck. I sat for a minute. I took the notebook out of my shirt pocket. I looked at the page with the 2 words, Daniel, promise. I put it back. I got out of the truck. I locked the door. I walked across the lot toward the front entrance. The wind off Lake Erie hit me when I came around the corner of the building. It was the kind of wind that does not care who you are or what you have come for. It went straight through the navy blazer. I had to lean into it to keep walking. I went up the steps. I pulled open the heavy glass door. The lobby was warmer than I expected, and quieter. There was a security desk with a uniformed guard. There were 2 visitor chairs against a wall, with a coffee table that had 3 folded newspapers on it. There was a large brass plaque on the back wall with the seal of the Port of Cleveland, and a list of past directors going back to 1961. The most recent name, at the bottom of the list, read Daniel S., Re-Director, 2011 to present. The S, I remembered, stood for son. His mother had picked it. It meant goodness. I walked up to the security desk. I'm here to see Daniel Ree, I said. My name is James Whitaker. I'm expected. The guard didn't look up from his computer right away. He just typed for a second. Then he looked up. Yes, sir, Mr. Whitaker. He's expecting you. I'll let his office know you're here. Have a seat for just a moment. I sat in one of the visitor chairs. The clock above the front desk read 8:52. I waited. 2 minutes later, the elevator across the lobby opened and a woman came out. She was in her late 50s, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit, with a small badge clipped to her lapel. She walked directly to me. She held out her hand. Mr. Whitaker, I'm Carol Yee. I'm Director Ree's Chief of Staff. He's ready for you. Please come with me. I stood up. I shook her hand. I followed her to the elevator. We rode up to the 4th floor. She didn't make small talk. I appreciated that. The 4th floor was quiet. Carpeted hallway. Soft yellow light. The smell of fresh coffee somewhere. She led me to a set of double wooden doors at the end of the hall. She knocked once. Then she opened the doors and stepped aside. Director Ree, she said. Mr. Whitaker is here. I walked in. The office was large, but not showy. A big desk against the far wall, in front of a window that looked out over the port. From where I stood, I could see the cranes, the container yards, 3 ships at anchor in the harbor, and the gray edge of Lake Erie stretching out to the horizon. A man stood up from behind the desk. He was thinner than I remembered. His hair had gone fully gray, swept back in a style I didn't recognize. He wore a dark gray suit, a white shirt, and a navy tie. He looked, at first glance, like exactly what he was, a senior executive at the top of his career. But when he came around the desk, he walked the same way, a slightly tilted, careful walk that I would have known from across any warehouse floor. He crossed the room. He stopped about 3 feet from me. We looked at each other for a long moment. He held out his hand. I took it. The handshake lasted longer than handshakes do. Neither of us spoke. Then he let go, and he took a small step back. And he said the first thing he'd said to me in person since the spring of 1994. "Hello, James." "Hello, Danny." He gestured to a small seating area by the window, 2 leather chairs, a low table, a tray with coffee already poured. "Sit," he said. "I have a lot to tell you, and I'd like to do it slowly, if that's all right with you." "I've got all morning, Danny." "Good," he said, "because so do I." We sat down in the 2 leather chairs by the window. He poured a little cream into his coffee. I drank mine black. The light through the window was that particular kind of light you get over Lake Erie in November, pale and even and slightly silver, like the inside of a shell. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just looked at each other across the low table. "I'm going to start with an apology," he said. "Danny." "James, I've been writing it for 11 years. Let me say it." I nodded. He set his coffee down. He folded his hands on his knee. "I should have called you. I should have called you a long time ago. I let life run away from me. I told myself you were busy, that I was busy, that we'd see each other at a conference or an industry event, and we'd pick up where we left off. And then 10 years went by, and then 11. And the longer I waited, the harder it got to pick up the phone. That's the truth. I am sorry. James. I should have been a better friend than that." I sat with it for a second. "Danny, you don't owe me a phone call. You never did." "I know I don't. That's exactly why I owe it more." We looked at each other. I think a younger version of me would have argued with him about it. I think a younger version of me would have tried to wave it off and minimize it. But I am 58 years old, and I have learned that when a man offers you an apology that he has been carrying for a decade, the only thing to do is take it. "All right," I said. "I accept it." He nodded once. "Thank you." He picked up his coffee again. He looked out the window for a moment. "James, I read about you in the trade press a few times over the years. I knew you were at Halberd. I knew you were running operations. I knew, from people I'd kept in touch with, that you were good. I want to say that to you. People talked about you. In a small industry. That matters." "Thank you, Danny." 3 months ago, I read about the Viridian takeover. I had a feeling about it. I've seen those funds before. I've seen what they do to good companies. I almost called you then. I should have. But I told myself you were a grown man. You knew your situation. You didn't need me checking on you. He set his coffee down again. He looked at me directly. 2 weeks ago, A man I know, a customs broker named Patel out of Detroit. You've probably crossed paths with him, called me about something else. And at the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, he said, "Did you hear they let James Whitaker go at Halberd?" He said it just like that, as if you were a side note. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. James, I want you to understand. I sat in this chair for about an hour after that call. I didn't take any other meetings the rest of that afternoon. I just sat here and looked out at the water. And I thought about a winter night in 1993. And I thought about a young man who handed me half a ham sandwich and told me to go see my mother. He stopped. His jaw worked for a second. I could see him deciding whether to say something or not. He decided to. James, my mother died 11 days after that night. I was with her when she went. I was with her because of you. And I have carried that around with me for 32 years. There is not a thing I have done in my career, not a single promotion, not a single deal, not a single hire I've made that hasn't been in part shaped by the fact that I was given those 11 days. By a man who didn't have to give them to me. He took a breath. I'm telling you this, so you'll understand what I am about to ask you. I'm not asking out of pity. I'm not asking because I feel sorry for you. I'm asking because I have been waiting for 32 years. For the moment when I might have something to offer you that was worth a fraction of what you offered me. And it has finally arrived. I sat very still. Go on, Danny. He turned in his chair. He picked up a folder from the table beside him and set it between us. James, the Port of Cleveland has been growing. We have expanded our container capacity by 30% in the last 4 years. We have new shipping lanes opening through the St. Lawrence. We have a partnership with a logistics consortium out of Montreal that will, within 18 months, make us the largest inland port on the Great Lakes. We have more work than we have people who know how to do it. He paused. I have a position open. I have been trying to fill it for about a year. Senior Strategic Advisor to the Director. It's a new role. I created it. It reports directly to me. The job is to help me run this port the way it needs to be run for the next decade. The salary is $270,000 a year, with benefits, a port-funded retirement contribution, and an annual performance bonus. I felt my heart beat in my chest. I tried to keep my face still. I am not sure I succeeded. I have interviewed 11 people for that job over the last year. Some of them were good. None of them were right. The role requires somebody who understands what actually moves a port. Not the software, not the spreadsheets, the people, the handshakes, the favors owed and the favors granted, the customs brokers in Detroit, the freight foreman in Pittsburgh, the dispatchers in Indianapolis who will take a Sunday call when the load needs to move. He looked at me. James, I have been holding that position open. I want to be honest with you about that too. About 6 months ago, my chief of staff asked me why I wasn't moving on the hire. I told her I was waiting for the right person. The truth is, I was waiting for you. I didn't know I was until 2 weeks ago. But I was. He pushed the folder across the table. I'd like you to take the job. I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. I sat in that leather chair, with the pale silver light of Lake Erie coming through the window, and I tried to feel what I was feeling. I felt a lot of things at once. I felt the warmth of a friendship that had not died over 30 years. I felt the relief of a man whose career had been declared dead 2 weeks ago, discovering that it had not been. I felt the small, sharp pleasure of knowing that Brandon Cole, somewhere in his expensive office in Toledo, would not be expecting this. And I felt, underneath all of it, the quiet weight of the notebook in my shirt pocket, the names, the promises, the two-way ledger. "Danny," I said, slowly, "there is something else. Before I answer, tell me." "There's a contract Halberd has at this port. A manufacturing client out of Cincinnati. Paperwork problems. They have been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. I assume you know." "I know. I want to be clear with you about something. I am not here to help Brandon Cole save that contract. I am not here to trade my friendship with you for the career of a man who fired me. I want you to know that. Before I take the folder, before I look at the salary, before any of it, I want you to know that whatever you decide about Halberd's contract has nothing to do with me. I am not asking you for anything on their behalf." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I did not expect. He laughed, a small, dry laugh, not unkind, almost relieved. "Oh, James," he said, "I want you to know something. I knew, the second I picked up the phone to call you, that you would say exactly that, word for word. That is precisely why I want you in this chair across from me." He picked up his coffee again. He took a sip. "As for Halberd, I want to make my position clear to you. I have, in fact, already made my decision about that contract. I made it 3 weeks ago, before I knew you were involved. I declined to take their call because their compliance department filed paperwork that was incomplete and, in 2 cases, fraudulent. We don't do business that way at this port. They will be losing that contract regardless of you. Their problem is not your friendship with me. Their problem is that they hired a child to run their compliance and a child to run their operations." He paused. "That decision is mine. It has nothing to do with you, and I want it understood between us, here and now, that your starting this job has nothing to do with their losing that contract. The two things are separate. I want you working for me because of what I just told you, because I have been waiting 32 years to have something worth offering. Not because of anything that is about to happen to Brandon Cole. He is going to face the consequences of his own decisions on his own timeline. He does not require any help from us." I sat with that for a long time. I thought about it. I thought about it carefully. "Danny," I said finally, "I would like one night to talk to my wife. That's all. Take all the nights you need. One will be enough." He smiled. Then, a real smile. Not the kind you put on for a meeting. The kind a man gives an old friend across a kitchen table, or across a 30-year-old memory. "It is very good to see you, James." "It is very good to see you, Danny." I looked out the window past his shoulder. The cranes were still moving in their slow, patient way. The container ship at the south berth was being loaded one box at a time. The lake stretched out behind it, gray and wide and old. I had driven 120 miles to sit in this chair. I had driven through 32 years of life to sit in this chair. And I sat in it for another half an hour, drinking coffee with the man who had been the senior man on the night shift at Whitman Harrison in the winter of 1993. And we did not talk about the job. And we did not talk about Halberd. And we did not talk about Brandon Cole. We talked about his sister, who had taken over the dry cleaner in 1994 and run it for 22 years before selling it and retiring to Florida. We talked about my daughter Hannah and the dog she was thinking about adopting. We talked about a customs broker in Detroit who had a daughter going through chemo, and who, it turned out, Daniel also knew. We talked about Marlene. We talked about the night shift coffee at Whitman Harrison, which had been, Daniel said, the worst coffee that had ever been brewed in the state of Ohio, and probably in any state bordering Ohio. We laughed, not big laughs, the kind of laughs two old men give each other across 30 years. When I left his office at 11:30 in the morning, Carol Yee walked me down to the lobby. She did not say much. At the door, she stopped and looked at me. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. "Yes. He has been a good man to work for 14 years. I know. I don't know what you said to him a long time ago, but I have watched him for 14 years, and there are very few people he has ever talked about. You are one of them. I want you to know that." I looked at her. I nodded. I didn't have anything to say back that would have been adequate. "Thank you, Carol." She shook my hand. She walked back to the elevator. I went out the front door. The wind off Lake Erie was still there, doing what wind does. I crossed the parking lot to my truck. I got in. I sat in the cab for a minute. I took out the notebook. I held it in my lap. I did not open it. Then I started the truck, and I drove home to my wife. I got home a little before 2 in the afternoon. Marlene was at the kitchen counter, peeling potatoes for dinner. She heard the back door. She didn't turn around. She just kept peeling. "You're back," she said. "I'm back." You hungry?" "I could eat." She put the potatoes down. She turned around. She looked at me for a long moment. In that way she has, where her eyes do the asking and her mouth doesn't have to. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make you a sandwich. Then you tell me." I sat down at the kitchen table. The folder was in my hand. I set it on the table between us. She made me a turkey sandwich with mustard and a little lettuce, the way she had been making it since 1993. She put it on a plate. She put the plate in front of me. She sat down across from me. "Tell me," she said. I told her. I told her all of it. I told her about the office and the window and the leather chairs. I told her about Daniel's apology and about the ham sandwich, which I had never told her about in 32 years. I told her about Daniel's mother and the 11 days. I told her about the job and the salary. I told her about Halberd losing the contract and that Daniel had decided that on his own before he knew I was involved. I told her that I had told Daniel I needed a night to talk to her. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I got to the part about the ham sandwich, her eyes got a little wet, but she did not say anything. When I was done, she sat for a moment. Then she reached across the table. She took my hand. "James," she said. "Yeah." I want you to know something. You have been a good man for as long as I have known you. You have been a good man when nobody was watching. You have been a good man on the nights when it cost you something, and on the nights when it cost you nothing. And I have always believed that the world would notice eventually. That is not a thing I have ever said out loud, because it sounded like the kind of thing a wife says to make a husband feel better. But I have believed it. For 32 years. She squeezed my hand. Sure, this is the world noticing. James, this is what it looks like. You don't have to make a big deal of it. You don't have to make a speech. You just have to say yes. I looked at her. You want me to take it? I want you to take it. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of work. You like work. It's 2 hours from here. You like driving. I almost laughed. What about Halberd? I said. What about the people there? She looked at me very steadily. And James, you said Daniel told you Halberd's losing that contract regardless. So Halberd's going to do what Halberd's going to do. That boy Brandon is going to do what that boy is going to do. None of that is yours to fix. But I will tell you one thing. The people at Halberd, the ones you actually care about. Earl, Rosa, Mike, Tony, Karen in HR. They are still going to be there when the smoke clears. And when the smoke clears, James, when you have settled into this new job, and you are doing your good work for Daniel, you are going to be in a position to do something for them. I don't know what yet, but you will be, and I know you well enough to know that when that moment comes, you will know what to do. I sat with that. You're a wise woman, Marlene. I have had a long time to think about you. James Whittaker. It would be a shame if I had not learned something. We sat at the kitchen table for a while. The afternoon light was coming through the window over the sink. Low and yellow. The way it comes in November when the sun is already starting to think about going down. I picked up the sandwich. I took a bite. This is a good sandwich, I said. I have been making you that sandwich for 32 years. I know. You are welcome. I called Daniel back at 4:30 that afternoon. He answered on the second ring. Daniel Ree. It's James. There was a small silence. Tell me, he said. I accept. I'd like to start Monday, if Monday still works. Monday works. There's one thing, Danny. Tell me. I took a breath. I looked across the kitchen at Marlene, who was back at the counter, peeling potatoes again, pretending not to listen. There are 3 people from Halberd. Earl Coleman, Rosa Delgado, Mike Stoll. They were on the list with me. They were let go the same morning. I want to bring them with me. Not at my level, not at my salary, but in roles that fit who they are. Earl knows dispatch like he knows his own kitchen. Rosa can run an inventory system in her sleep. Mike has 30 years on the freight side. I am not asking you to make room for them out of charity. I am telling you they will be good for the port. I am telling you I would not stake my own reputation on them if I didn't believe it. Daniel was quiet for a second. James, you haven't even started yet, and you're already trying to hire your own staff. I am. He laughed. That same dry, quiet laugh from the morning. Send me their names tomorrow. I'll have HR set up interviews next week. We have openings on the operations side. If they are half as good as you say, we will find a place for them. Thank you, Danny. James, do not thank me. They are going to make the port better. Or they are not. You will see what happens. But I trust your judgment. I trusted it on a night shift in 1993. I trust it today. We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. Marlene came over and sat down across from me. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with that slow, steady look. "Oh, you all right?" she asked, finally. "I'm all right. More than all right, maybe. I picked up the folder from the table. I opened it for the first time. I read through the offer letter slowly. I read it twice. I signed it on the second pass, in the same handwriting I had used to sign my first lease, my marriage license, my mortgage, and my daughter's birth certificate. I closed the folder. I put it back on the table. I picked up the notebook from my shirt pocket. I set it next to the folder. 2 small books on a kitchen table, one 31 years old, one brand new. A whole life sitting between them. I called Earl Coleman first. I called him from the back porch, with the sun setting behind me and the maple tree casting a long, thin shadow across the yard. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Earl." "James, how you doing?" "Earl, I need you to sit down." "I am sitting. I am always sitting. What's going on?" I told him. I kept it simple. I told him I had been offered a job at the Port of Cleveland. I told him I was starting Monday. I told him there was room for him on the operations side, if he wanted it. Earl was quiet for a long time. So quiet I thought we had been disconnected. "Earl, you there?" "I'm here, James." "You all right?" "I'm—" He stopped. I heard him clear his throat. I heard him cover the receiver with his hand for a second. When he came back on, his voice was different. "James, listen. I have been driving Edith to her doctor appointments for 2 months, and every time we get in the car, she asks me what we're going to do. And every time I have told her something that is not exactly a lie but is not exactly the truth either. I have told her not to worry. I have told her we will figure something out. I have told her the Lord provides. I have told her all the things you tell a woman who has been your wife for 41 years when you do not yourself know the answer to the question she is asking. James, what you just told me, I do not have words for it yet. Give me a minute." I gave him a minute. When he came back, his voice was a little steadier. You are sure?" "I am sure. And there's a real job there, not a makeup job, not charity." "Earl, there is more work at this port than there are people who know how to do it. Daniel told me himself this morning. He needs you. I am not making this up." All right, what? All right. I'm in. Of course I'm in. I will drive up there tomorrow morning if that is what they need. Monday is fine. Earl, Monday is more than fine. He laughed. Then, a small, slightly broken laugh. "James Whitaker, you are something else. You know that. I'm not. I just remembered some numbers. Whatever you say, James. I called Rosa next. I caught her at the grocery store. She stepped outside the building to talk. I could hear the wind on her end of the line. I told her the same thing. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, in a voice that broke a little, James, I have been applying for jobs for 2 weeks. Nobody calls me back. I am 57 years old. They think I am too old. Even at the warehouse jobs, they take one look at my date of birth on the application, and they don't call. I have been wondering whether I am going to have to ask Sophia to move in with us. Rosa, you won't? Are you sure? I am sure. She started crying. She did not try to hide it. She just stood in the parking lot of the grocery store and cried into the phone. And I stood on my back porch and let her. After a while, she said, James, I am so tired of being told my time is over. I am so tired. I know, Rosa. Tell me again when I start. Monday. 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 Rosa, take the weekend. Get some sleep. I called Mike Stoll last. Mike was the easiest call of the three. Mike has been a man of few words for 62 years. He listened to what I had to say. He said, well, all right. James. He said, tell me where to be and when to be there. He said, tell Marlene I said hello. And then he hung up. That was Mike. I stood on the porch after that for a long time. The sun had gone all the way down. The first stars were out. I could see the shape of the maple tree against the dark. The wind was up a little. The branches were moving the way they do in November. I thought about what Marlene had said at the table. This is the world noticing. I had not done the things I had done over 30 years for this. I had not made the notebook for this. I had not given Daniel the half-a-ham sandwich for this. I had not stayed at Halberd through bad bosses and bad years and bad winters for this. But it had come anyway. That, I thought, was maybe what grace was. Grace was a thing you didn't earn, but that found you anyway. Sometimes very late, after you had given up on it finding anyone. I went back inside. Marlene was at the kitchen table, reading a book. She looked up. You make the calls. I made them. All three. All three. And they're coming. She nodded once. She went back to her book. That was Marlene. Saturday morning, I went to Ruthie's. I sat down in my booth at 6:15. Dolores brought my coffee. Walter came in around 6:30 and sat down across from me. He had on the same green flannel shirt he had on every Saturday in November. I told Walter about the job. I told him the way you tell a man you have been having breakfast with for a month, slowly, quietly, without making a fuss. Walter listened. He drank his coffee. When I was done, he set his cup down. James, he said. Yeah, Walter. I want to tell you something. I worked at the Jeep plant for 38 years. They gave me a watch when I retired. I have the watch in a drawer somewhere. I haven't worn it. You know why? No. Because the watch wasn't the point. The point was that I showed up, every day, for 38 years. The watch was a thing they handed me on the way out so they could close the door behind me. But the showing up was the point. That was the actual thing. You understand what I'm saying? I think so. What I'm saying, James, is that you have been showing up for 31 years. That's the actual thing. The job you just got. The salary. The office that's the watch. That's the thing they hand you to close the door. The actual thing is what you have already done. I want you to remember that. Don't let the watch fool you. I sat with that for a moment. Walter, that is the smartest thing anyone has said to me in 2 months. He shrugged. I'm 70 years old, and I have a greenhouse full of tomatoes and a wife who still puts up with me. I have a few things figured out. I laughed. He laughed. Dolores came over and refilled our coffee without asking. She did not linger. She did not pry. She just refilled the cups and went back to the counter. That, too, was the actual thing. I want to tell you the rest of it in pieces, because that's how the rest of it came. Not in one big moment, in small, ordinary, steady pieces, the way most of life arrives. I started at the Port of Cleveland on Monday. I drove up at 6 in the morning. Daniel met me in the lobby. He walked me to my office. It was on the 3rd floor, with a window that looked east toward the breakwater. He had ordered me a chair that was the same shape as the one in his office. He had stocked the desk drawer with the same kind of pencils I had used at Halberd for 20 years. I do not know how he knew which kind. I did not ask. Earl started 2 weeks later. Rosa. 3 weeks after that, Mike. The same week as Rosa. The 4 of us had lunch together on Mike's first day, in the cafeteria on the 2nd floor, and Earl ordered a sandwich that was almost exactly the same as the sandwich I had given Daniel in 1993, and none of us mentioned it, because none of us had to. The Viridian Board. I learned later from Earl, who had heard it from a friend who worked at corporate, fired Brandon Cole at the end of November. They did not say it was because of the lost contract. They said it was a change in strategic direction. That is how those companies always say it. Brandon, the last I heard, took a position at another private equity firm in Chicago, where he is, I assume, still using the phrase $1,000 thinkers and still wearing shoes that cost more than other people's mortgages. I do not wish him ill. I do not wish him anything. He passed through my life like a hard winter wind, and the wind has moved on, and the maple tree my father planted is still standing. That is all I have to say about Brandon Cole. Hannah came home for Christmas. She brought the dog she had adopted, a brown mutt named Pete who had one ear up and one ear down. Pete fell asleep on my feet by the fireplace, and I sat with my hand on his head. And I thought about how strange and large a life can be, how a man can spend 31 years carrying a small notebook around, and how that notebook can lead him through a path he could not have charted, to a Christmas evening with a dog asleep on his feet and his daughter in the next room laughing at something her mother said. In January, I drove out to the Port of Cleveland one Saturday morning. I was not supposed to be working. I just wanted to stand at the breakwater and look at the water. Daniel met me there. He had a thermos of coffee. We did not say much. We just stood at the railing and watched the ice that was starting to form along the edges of the harbor. "Danny," I said, after a while. "Yeah, James. You ever go back in your head to that night?" He thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes," he said. "Not the way you'd think. I don't think about the mistake. I don't think about Buck. I think about the sandwich. I think about you tearing it in half. That's what stays. Why the sandwich? You think? He looked out at the water. Not because it was the small thing. James. The big thing was taking the blame. The big thing was costing yourself a day's pay so I could go to Cleveland. That's the thing other people would tell the story about. But the sandwich was the part where you saw that I hadn't eaten. The sandwich was the part where you were paying attention. The big thing came out of the small thing. Without the sandwich, there's no taking the blame. You understand? I think I do. Most of life is sandwiches. James, big things are rare, small things are constant, and most people miss them. You didn't. That's the actual thing. We stood for a while longer. The wind off the lake was cold, but not unkind. You sound like a man named Walter, I know, I said. Who? A friend of mine. He has a greenhouse. He sounds wise. He is. We went back inside. The maple tree my father planted is still in the front yard of our house. It survived another winter. It will probably survive me, too. I'd like to think so. Anyway, I'd like to think that long after I am gone, somebody will sit on that porch in November and watch the last red leaves cling to its branches. And they will not know the man who planted it or the man who watched it grow. But they will feel something, some small, steady thing that has been passed forward without a name on it. That is what I have come to believe a life is, more than anything else. A life is a thing you pass forward without your name on it. A small kindness here, a remembered birthday there, a half a sandwich on a winter night when somebody you work with hasn't slept properly in a month. You do these things, and you do not keep score, and you do not expect anything to come of them. Most of the time, nothing does. But sometimes once or twice in a long life, if you are very lucky, one of them comes back. And it comes back not because you earned it, but because somebody on the other side of it has been carrying you in their heart for 32 years, waiting for the moment to give back what you gave. That is what happened to me. I am not telling you this story because I think I am a special man. I am telling you this story because I think most of you listening are doing the same thing I did, and you do not know it. You are paying attention to the small things. You are remembering names. You are showing up. You are tearing sandwiches in half on hard nights and not making a big deal of it. And you are wondering, quietly, late at night, whether any of it adds up to anything at all. I am here to tell you that it does. I am here to tell you that the world keeps a quieter ledger than we think. I am here to tell you that even if the world never settles up, even if no phone call ever comes, even if no door ever opens, the work itself was not wasted. The kindness itself was not wasted. The small, steady showing up was not wasted. You were the kind of person who tore the sandwich in half. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, almost everything. The notebook is still in my shirt pocket. There are new names in it now. A few from the port. A young woman named Aisha who runs the second shift in the container yard, whose father just had a stroke, whose name I wrote down so I wouldn't forget to ask about him. A man named Felipe in dispatch, whose son just made the high school baseball team. Carol Yee, Daniel's chief of staff, whose mother lives in Cincinnati and who drives down once a month to see her. The notebook keeps growing. That is what it is for. Marlene is in the kitchen. I can hear her from the porch. She is making dinner, meatloaf, by the smell of it, which means either something hard has happened or something good has. And tonight, for once, it is the second one. The maple tree is bare again. November is coming around again. The wind off the lake has not changed in 100 years. I am 60 years old now. I have 2 more years of work in me. I think maybe 3. Then I will retire from the port for real. And Daniel will retire a year or 2 after me. And we will sit on a porch somewhere and watch the water and not say very much. The way 2 old friends can sit and not say very much and still understand each other perfectly. That is a long way off. For now, there is work to do. There are loads to move and people to remember and small things to pay attention to. There are sandwiches to tear in half when the moment calls for it. I want to thank you for listening to my story. I know it was a long one. I know the world is full of louder voices and faster stories, and I am grateful you stayed with this one all the way to the end. If anything in it landed somewhere true for you, if it reminded you of somebody you used to know, or of a kindness you did once that you have not thought about in a long time, or of a kindness somebody once did for you that you have never properly thanked them for, I hope you will go and do something with that. Call the person, write the letter, tear the sandwich in half. If you have enjoyed listening, I would be grateful if you would consider liking this story, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with somebody who might need to hear it. There are a lot of people out there right now who have been told their time is over, and it is not over. It is not over for them. It is not over for you. The world keeps a quieter ledger than we think. And whatever you believe about God, and I will not tell you what to believe about that, because that is not my place. I will tell you this. I have lived 60 years now, and I have come to believe that somewhere, somehow, what we put into the world does not disappear. It stays. It waits. And sometimes, on a Thursday morning in November, when you are not expecting it at all, it picks up the phone and calls you back. Thank you for listening. Be well and be steady. That is the whole story.